Well, friends, today our scripture lesson is taken from the Gospel according to Luke chapter 12, verses 32 through 40. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. Well, every so often during the year, I like to induce a little bit of panic in people. It's just fun. So I just thought I would just mention that today is 136 shopping days until Christmas. Okay, so I'm sure you've been thinking about it. I'm sure it's been top of mind, and you've been making your lists, and you're wondering what it is that you're going to get people in your life, right? Everybody who hasn't started their Christmas shopping yet. No? Okay, all right, yeah, me too. But I guess one of the questions is, when are you going to start? Okay, when do you actually start? I don't know how many people are last minute, they go right until, that December 20th kind of thing, or at least these days now we talk about, do you run right up to that point where Amazon is saying, I can't get it to you before Christmas, even if you order it with express shipping. Okay, that's kind of the deadline. But a lot of people put things off, to the last minute. They put them off. They don't even think about them ahead of time. And really, this question of when are we going to act versus putting things off and delaying is what I think Jesus is teaching us in this passage today. Okay, because what happens is we actually have this passage which is kind of two stories in one. So we kind of have the tail end of one teaching, and then Jesus sort of abruptly goes into this other teaching. And the tail end of the first teaching is actually kind of the end of the passage we dealt with last week, where Jesus was talking about possessions. He was talking about things that you have. And so early on in the passage we have for this week, he says, sell your possessions and give alms. And again, if you were here last week or you watched the message online last week, possessions is not a noun in the Greek text. It's actually a verb, okay? And so sell what you're possessing, okay? Sell the things that you're possessing. So it kind of talks about more of your attitude toward the item. Sell the things you're possessing. It's sort of an active thing as opposed to selling these things, okay? So it's really talking about the effect that it has on your psyche, on your mental state. Sell the things that you're possessing, and then it says, give them away, give alms. And that word alms is a word that talks about charitable giving, about compassionate giving. In fact, for those attorneys in the room, you know that there's this word, eleemosynary, which is this Latin word that refers to like a non-profit corporation. It's called the eleemosynary corporation. And the Greek word there is eleemosynē, which is this word that means, charity, basically, compassionately. And so it's referring to the attitude that you have in giving it away, that as you give the money away, as you give those possessions away, you're giving them with this attitude of compassion, with an attitude of charity. So that statement, sell your possessions and give alms, is really directed at the mindset that you have, not just the things, okay? So if you sit there and say, okay, I'm just going to legalistically follow this, and I'm going to just do it, all right? I'm going to sell something that I own and give the money away, but you're not doing it with the right heart, okay? That's not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about selling the things that have a hold on you, all right? The things that you're obsessed about possessing, and instead turn that into something charitable and compassionate. Okay? It's about the attitude that you have in doing this. And he sets that apart from the natural instinct that we have to keep and preserve. But what he's setting up here is talking about the idea that this desire to keep and preserve that we often do because it makes us feel more secure really doesn't, all right? He says, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. See, we think that if we hang on to stuff, we're going to feel secure, we're going to feel safe. He's like, no, you don't understand. You hang on to stuff, you're still worried. Thieves can come, all right? Moths can destroy, all right? So the stuff that you think you're hanging on to for the sake of security isn't necessarily as secure as you think, all right? But we have this idea that preservation is an instinct, all right? Preservation is an instinct that we have. We want to hang on to it, but we don't understand that it's a lot harder to preserve than it seems, okay? Well, it's not as easy and it's not as safe as it seems, and yet that is what we try to do. We try to stay in the same place. We try to hang on to what we have. We'll stay where we are until something compels us to move. But if we get locked in that, what happens? You never go anywhere. All right? You just hang on to what you have. You stay where you are. You take no chances. But we have to begin and take those chances and move. And that decision to move is often something that we rationalize in a backwards kind of way. And Jesus shakes us out of it by giving us a saying that appears a couple times in the Gospels. And I've always thought that it's one of the most counterintuitive things Jesus ever tells us. And it's when he says this. He says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." All right? And I think that is so counterintuitive. So we tend to think that if our heart is somewhere, then our treasure will go. When my heart is with whatever cause, whatever people, then my treasure will flow. And Jesus says, no, you got that backwards. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. All right? So think about what this means. I mean, if you sit there and you say, hey, I have my treasure and I'm holding it close and I'm just waiting for something to move my heart into a different place, and when my heart moves, my treasure will follow, Jesus is saying, no. As long as your treasure stays, so will your heart. All right? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Okay? I was at a conference this week with Felicia a couple days. We were at Global Leadership Summit. And one of the speakers is this wonderful woman named Liz Bohannon. And she has founded this business called Seiko Designs. And it's based in Africa. And it started in Uganda. Okay? And what they do is they make clothing of all kinds. And they basically hire young women who want to go to college and can't afford it. And the point of her business is allowing these young women to be able to work and go to college, and they sell the sandals and things here. And the first shoe they made was this really simple sandal. It was just a sandal that she said she had messed around with in college. It's a sandal where you just kind of have these long straps and you tie it around your ankles. Okay, it's a lady's shoe. And she said that she had come up with that design. She said the way she put it was great. She said, I wanted a flip-flop that didn't flip-flop. Okay, and so it was just a flip-flop with straps that would tie around. And she went to Uganda, and she didn't go with this idea that she wanted to start this big business or do all this. She just went to Uganda because she wanted to learn more about the plight of people there. And she came across these young girls who had finished high school and weren't going to be able to afford university. which meant that they were probably just going to go off and get married, and they weren't going to live into this other potential that they might have had. And so it started, she said simply this. She says, I had no passion for design, for fashion. And she said, I had no passion for business. But she met these 3 girls who graduated high school and weren't sure that they could afford to go to college. And she said, I just made them a promise that if you spend this 9-month gap between high school, the end of high school, and the start of university, if you spend 9 months making these sandals for me, I will pay for your college. And so they did, and she brought the sandals back to the U.S., and she literally started selling them out of the trunk of her car. Okay. And now this has expanded to having hundreds of employees in Uganda and Ethiopia with the same kind of mission. But she just wrote a book, and she was talking about these principles that she learned along the way, which kind of went the opposite of what we would normally think. And she said this, she said, you will not find your passion, but you can build it. She said, this idea that you should just sit back and do nothing and wait for your passion. Wait to find your passion, and then you'll throw everything into it, okay? She says, no, it's not going to happen. You're not going to find your passion. She said, you have to build your passion, all right? And another thing she says all these things that are well-meaning actually end up leading you not to act. Like she said, dream big. She says that's a disservice. She said, dream small. She said, dream small. Don't dream big, dream small. All right? She said all these things, dream big and blah, blah, blah. Another one she says, by the way, I think is pretty funny. She says, you're not special, you're average. Okay. And she said it was all these things about saying, you know what? You're not special, you're average. And average can do great things. Because you're going to dream small, and you're going to build your passion. All right? And all those things, she said, lead you to action because it becomes doable. All right? That if you sit there and say, I'm not going to do anything until I have this big overriding passion that consumes me, you're just going to sit there and do nothing. If you dream so big that everything you might accomplish seems so small and minuscule compared to the size of the problem, all right, you're not going to do anything. Dream small. And don't wait to find your passion. Build it. Because what Jesus is telling us, you know what? Your heart follows your treasure. So if your treasure stays put, so will your heart. So what Jesus said was start putting your treasure where I want it to be. Sell your possessions and give alms. All right? Start putting your treasure where it needs to go so that your heart will follow your treasure. Because we have so many things that keep us staying put, and we don't even understand it. I mean, when he moves into that second part of the passage and he starts talking about that example, that metaphor of the servants who are waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, and he says, those servants shouldn't just be sitting around doing nothing. He says, be dressed for action. And that in the Greek, that phrase that's translated as dressed for action, it's a complete substitution of idea. Because in the Greek, it's literally the phrase that we've heard once in a while, gird your loins. Okay? Gird your loins is what that literally is, that they translated as dressed for action. And if you're not familiar with what gird your loins literally meant, it was that, people wore those long tunics, and you couldn't run in them. All right? I think ladies, because guys generally don't wear skirts, ladies probably have a little more idea of the understanding that it's difficult to run in a long skirt than men do with current fashions. But apparently, I've not tried it, but apparently it is difficult to run. All right? And so the idea of gird your loins, what it meant was to take that long tunic and tie it up. All right? Gird it up around your loins so that your legs are free to be able to run. Okay? And I think what Jesus is trying to tell us is that there are a lot of things that we don't even notice are a problem. You know, you put your tunic on in the morning. If a tunic was your thing, you would just put it on in the morning, and you don't really understand that it's binding you. You don't really understand that it's restricting your motion. You don't really understand that you're not able to do what you actually could do, so you have to tie it up. And I think Jesus is saying the same thing about stuff, about possessions, is that it's binding you in ways you don't understand. It's binding you, it's holding you, it's keeping you where you are. You keep thinking that if your heart is pulled away by some grand passion, that suddenly your treasure will follow your heart. And he's like, no, you need to unbind yourself. You need to unbind yourself and begin putting some of that treasure off in different places in order to be able to have your heart want to follow. And quite frankly, today when we think about what's keeping us from running, when we think about treasure or possessions, remember that, like I said, that word possessions is not a noun, it's a verb, it's stuff that you're possessing. And in that time, you know, he's using language that refers to really money. Okay? And I really know that in our society, at least in our local context, for so many people, your greatest possession is your time. For so many people, that's the thing that you have the least of, all right? And so if it's about the things that you're possessing, that you're hanging on to, I think for a lot of folks, it's not so much the money, but the time. I think for a lot of people, it's that space on the calendar that you're really possessing. And maybe what you need to do is take some of that time and put it where God would have you put it. But whatever it is in your life, think about it. Think about what is keeping you from being able to move. What is keeping you from being able to run in the direction that God would have you go? And just start. Just start taking what you have and put it in that direction. He says, you know, you must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. Now, clearly, at the first level, what Jesus is talking about is his second coming, right? He's talking about the idea that he's going to return and he wants to see us being productive. He wants to see us being fruitful. But I always believe that we can take that idea of the second coming and broaden out the idea from not just the literal second coming of Christ, but also the other ways in which Christ comes to us. And there are other ways in which Christ comes to us day by day. Christ comes to us in the faces of the needy, in the faces of the poor, in the faces of those we meet who need a relationship with him. Christ comes to us in those ways. Christ comes to us just, I think, in watching us. You know, I don't need Jesus to come back to earth to feel that he's going to catch me doing something that I shouldn't be doing. I kind of have the feeling he's watching already. Okay? So if I have the feeling that he's watching already and he's seeing, he's kind of here. All right? So there's the second coming in a big theological Christian sense, and there's kind of the always coming sense that Jesus is with me and seeing what I'm doing and wondering when I'm going to actually move. Liz Bohannon has another saying along this line, which I think is important for us to take away from this passage, and she says, if you're going to build a life of purpose, it is going to have to be on purpose. If you're going to build a life of purpose, it's going to have to be on purpose. You're going to have to decide that this is what you're going to do. If you sit back and wait and just say, I'm just going to sit back and wait and see if a purpose strikes me. I'm going to sit back and wait and see. Maybe it'll come, but for most it won't. And you'll just sit and you'll hang on to the things that are possessing you, and you won't move, you won't step out there, because it's so easy and natural to stay where we are. And what Christ is encouraging us to do is to take our treasure, whether that's money, whether that's time, whatever it is, and to put it out where God wants us to put it. Put it out in a godly direction. And when we do that, we're building a life of purpose. We're not waiting for it to grab us. We're putting it out there and we're building it on purpose. Being reminded that where our treasure is, our heart will follow. Amen.